later on. Now, I've given you some main reasons for the rationale, but in actual fact, one of the reasons for focusing on thinking is that it is the precursor to learning. Okay? That's my basic premise. And if we think a little bit more about thinking, believe it or not, it's the 12th most commonly used verb in English. But how well do we understand what's meant when someone says they're thinking? And what kinds of mental activity are you promoting in your classrooms? I hope you don't for one moment think that every one of my classrooms is a model thinking one. If I think back to my teaching on Wednesday night, some of the thinking they were doing was, you know, watching me, reading stuff. They weren't doing overly much thinking at all. That's my goal, is to try and build thinking into it. The premise is that if we want to support students in learning and we believe that learning is a product of thinking, then we need to be clear what it is we're trying to support. So it's unpacking that verb thinking. That's sort of the focus of the next little bit of what I'm going to talk about. However, I really am only going to give you a minute because, as I said, morning tea calls. You also have one last handout in your little pile, an A to Z grid, one of my favourite tools. Don't get me started because we'll never get finished. But at the moment, what you're going to do with your A to Z grid is to see how much of it you can fill out in a minute of words that describe thinking. Now, this is actually quite hard, so I'm going to give you a bit of a hint. There's the grid. Analyse, brainstorm, calculate. Okay, I'm just going to go back now. See how you go. Think about the kinds of thinking that your learners need to do in order to progress in your subject, or what they have to do in order to succeed, and see if you can brainstorm some verbs that what we really mean when we say think, or what kind of thinking it is. Okay, right, stopping you there. What the researchers are suggesting, actually I have to digress a little bit, that A to Z grid is like a cognitive tool that encourages people to dig deeper in terms of the vocabulary that they know. If you said brainstorm any words that you know about holidays, there's a kind of a natural lull and they don't continue any further. By providing a grid with the alphabet, they try and fill in all of the squares, and in the process of trying to fill all of the squares they think of other things, and it's just much deeper and better. The other thing is I use it for diagnostic testing to find out how much people know on a particular topic, and then towards the end of the unit I'd ask them to do the A to Z grid again in a different colour pen to demonstrate how much they've learnt. It's a good heuristic as well to refer back to. These are all the words related to persuasive writing. They can go back and look things up. When we usually ask people to read, to answer questions, but we don't actually specify. You need to infer, you need to compare, contrast, we analyse, hypothesise. We're not specifying the kind of thinking that we're asking people, and by not giving it a word and not highlighting that to learners, we're not, the theory goes that we're not promoting that kind of thinking in the most efficient and effective way. So, Project Zero, a group of researchers in education at Harvard, and they came up with, it's called Project Zero, or visible thinking. They were concerned about two particular types of classrooms, and I'm telling you now, I've seen both in mine. Tell and practice. The teacher tells the students that it's important, what is important to know or do, and then has them practice that skill or knowledge. It often occurs in high-stakes testing that promotes covering the curriculum and preparing for the test, and that includes universities. I do it too. The focus is on the completion of work and assignments. How many times do you say, I just need you to finish this? And schooling is about imparting knowledge and skills, and sort of unstated there is only. Or you've got classroom B, action-packed, lots of learner activities, possibly a misapplication of inquiry or experiential learning, which in essence is often a more palatable form of practice. that some of the activities that we get people to do, communicative language activities and whatever, in some ways they're just, as I said, a more engaging way of practicing the same thing in the first type of classroom. And the Project Zero researchers were of the view that this doesn't actually promote learning, and it certainly doesn't promote thinking. So they said that there is a relationship between thinking and learning, and that retention of information through rote practice isn't learning, it's training. And work and activity are not synonymous with learning. So even though people are actually working with the language, they seem to be engaged, are they actually learning, are they actually thinking, is what they asked. And so they see an interrelationship between thinking, understanding, which they regard as the goal of teaching and learning, is to understand stuff. Those of you who are aware of Bloom's, understanding is a lower order skill, and somehow the other things like analysis, application, evaluating, creating are considered higher, but truly understanding something really well, in their view, is our ultimate goal. Understanding is a deep form of learning. So, another thing for you to do. There is a thinking routine called Parts, Purposes and Complexities, and you're going to give it a go. I want you to think of something, it can be a little thing, that you understand really well. Okay? I actually found that the hardest part of the whole task. Because all of a sudden you realise, but, you know, what am I doing? What are the components or parts of this knowledge or skill? So maybe you're really good at baking scones, or, I don't know, it's very hard to think of something. Giving a presentation, like presenting to teachers or something like that. I've had lots of experience at it. I certainly know what the components are. What are the functions and purposes of the different parts? What makes the parts and purposes complex? What are the additional factors you need to consider when representing this knowledge or demonstrating this skill? Now, I just want to show you an example so that you'll feel more comfortable about trying it yourself. This is Year 4's understanding of fractions, okay? So, fractions is the number above the line, okay? The never-ending amount of numbers between 1 and 0, okay? Knowing maths, it's part of a fraction because you have to know maths to do fractions. It's the line, top number means how many, bottom number means the whole amount. So what they think are the parts of fractions. The purposes, this one could make you cry, practicing for harder work. My God, if that's what they're getting out of that, please, being able to do math between numbers, which I actually think is really rather clever, okay? They can be used to add up to an odd number. Oh God, don't know what they're on about that. Making something smaller. Can you see how this is revealing their level of understanding? And then the complexities, what they find hard, half of something can be a third of something else. Like half of 10 and a third of 15 are the same things, but a third is supposed to be smaller than a half. No, this is really good. That is clever. Showing quite a good understanding of equality and all those kinds of things. Reducing fractions seems like I'm making them smaller, but they're supposed to be equal. So 3 is bigger than 1 and 6 is bigger than 2, but 3, 6 and 1/2 are equivalent. How can that be? Okay? So any topic or any concept that you want people to either to find out what they know about it before you start to teach it, or to find out how effective you've been, you can use this thinking routine. But as I said, have a little think now at something you're good at, and can you identify the parts, can you identify the purposes, and what is it that makes it complex? Okay, so I am going to give you just a minute to think about that and get a sense that understanding is actually one of the higher things we're aiming for. I generally am trying to do multiple things at once because we all never have enough time. So I'm trying to demonstrate that understanding something is really quite a complex thing, but I'm also trying to show you a tool that you can use in your teaching. So imagine for a moment capital letters. What are the parts of capital letters? When are they used? What are their purposes? What makes them tricky? Okay, or writing a CV. What are the parts? What are the purposes of the different section? What makes it complicated? Okay. Thinking routines are designed to stop people from doing stuff at surface level and to think deeper and to look at what's happening behind assumptions, connections, purposes. How much of the writing that we see from our learners, they're not aware of the audience and they're not necessarily providing enough information so that you can follow logically what's happened. If you get people to think more deeply, then it has spin-offs in everything that they do. What are the parts of an effective job interview? You'll be able to think of lots of different things. Okay, and we're not doing this one now. This is your challenge. What are the kinds of thinking? What kinds of thinking do you value and want to promote in your classroom? Okay. So if you listed all the actions and activities your learners undertake in one of your typical lessons, so mine watched a YouTube. I can go through the kinds of things that they did, and then tick the ones that would constitute 75% of your lesson. Okay. Then, which ones are authentic to the discipline? Those kinds of things that an artist, a writer, a scientist, a linguist, a reader, an editor would do in their daily life? Or which actions did you use when you last went about developing some new understanding? So when you studied something or whatever. So what were the authentic things that you did? So when I read literature on thinking routines, I take notes because that forces me to remember things, and I only take notes of what I think are the heart of the matter, and then I try and think about an example. So the kinds of thinking that I undertake that helps me understand something, that's the kind of thinking that we also want to teach our learners. So Project Zero maintained that learners should be spending the bulk of their time on those authentic kinds of thinking that people need in real life. And so their goals are to facilitate greater understanding and to enhance learner engagement and independence. And how we do that is being aware of the type of thinking required, making thinking visible to learners. So developing and using a meta-language to describe different kinds of thinking, creating opportunities to use valued thinking. So if you need, and being analytical is important, and being able to analyse where are the opportunities. Target and promote the necessary thinking learners need to apply to develop understanding, solve problems, make judgments. And by using the meta-language, making them aware of the type of thinking, they become more meta-aware, so they know what they're doing and can therefore be strategic in selection and application of different types of thinking. So, here's crisis X. What kind of thinking do we need in order to solve this? What they did was they came up with a short list of high-leverage thinking moves that foster the development of understanding. In your non-existent handout was a copy of this, so you'll get it as well. These are the things that they think are really important to develop understanding, being able to make connections, fitting with what you already know, reasoning with evidence. Why did you do that? Oh, I don't know. Yeah, that's good. Oh, why is that? What makes you say that? That kind of thing. Considering different viewpoints, uncovering complexity, capturing the heart-forming conclusions, building explanations, describing what's there, very close observation and wondering. Now, I really am pressed for time, so I'm just not going to do what I always do, which is rush through the thing. So I'm just going to pick a couple of things and go to that in depth because you've got the notes. I want to show you 2 routines, or maybe 3, to finish off. A very, very simple one is called it's called See, Think, Wonder. So it forces people to think at one particular level. They are only allowed to list observations, very detailed. Then what they think is going on, they have to hypothesise, and then based on those other 2 steps, what are they wondering about, what questions are revealed. So here's an example of something that you might use. I personally Vic Teasol, we went to the library for the AGM last year, the library for the art gallery for the AGM last year, and I looked at this and thought, what a perfect thing for narrative. Imagine if you took one panel and they only described what they could see. You've collected the vocab, different people see different things, they're not allowed to interpret, so it teaches people to separate out the different types of thinking. What do you think might happen? Why do you think she's like this? That kind of thing. So getting people to hypothesise and interpret. And the other crucial thing is what makes you say that, because that forces them to reason with evidence. And this could be that I see, think, wonder routine gets people analysing and interpreting things in far more complexity, which then if, for example, you wanted people to write a narrative, there's depth in there and it's not just superficial. An alternative is the zoom in. Now, I've just chosen images, but it could be an object or it could be a photo of something. You cover over a large section of a picture or an object, and they have to imagine what they can see and tell you what they think's going on and why, and then you reveal more. This new information, how did it change your original thinking? And it was very interesting because I saw this being used in a Jewish school, and the women are all on one side and on the men, and this is an Orthodox Jewish school where that's the norm, so they didn't think that was strange at all, but in a different context people might have. So let me just show you what else is on the PowerPoint, which you can get. I just selected a few thinking routines to highlight their value. How do we get people digging deeper into ideas and not just treating things superficially? There's a routine called layers, and asking people, providing you with a framework for getting people to not just understand a piece of text, but look at different aspects of it. So, and the metaphor of the layer encourages people to go for depth. The only other, in fact, I'm going to skip that one. Two challenges for today. One was to think about the kinds of things that you get your learners to do, and I wanted you to try this thinking routine about my presentation. How does it connect with what you already know? How does it extend, or how has it extended your thinking? What do you still find challenging about what I've presented, or what would you like to challenge me on? If we had unlimited amounts of time, you would do that. However, so that you could be thinking about that over coffee.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for your attention.